Tetris is a perfect game. That's a statement that I've probably said 1,000,000 times over the last 35 years. It's not just that it's a perfect game, but I've long argued that Tetris started perfect, it's only gotten worse as they've added more to it. Now, after playing Tetris Forever, I can say with absolute certainty that I've been wrong this whole time. While I still contend that Tetris is, in fact, a perfect game, it definitely did not start out that way, and playing the earliest iterations dating all the way back to 1984 ended up being a real eye-opener for me. This was just one of the many revelations that I had while matching horizontal lines in Tetris Forever, the much-anticipated new compilation from digital Eclipse. After showing us the rotoscoping process in the making of Karateka, and diving deep into Lomonosov's history, the Gold Masters series is headed to Soviet Russia to tell the story of Tetris, one of the single most influential video games of all time. Find out what other revelations surprised me when I review Tetris Forever by Digital Eclipse. The nice thing about Tetris Forever is that it's a compilation based around Tetris, a game that needs no introduction. Be it on the Game Boy, the PlayStation, or a Chicken McNugget, everybody has played or at least seen Tetris. And if you've played Tetris, then you probably already know that it was made in Soviet Russia by a young math whiz named Alexei Pajitnov on his rudimentary Electronica 60 computer. But, as it turns out, the making of Tetris is just a small part of a much larger and crazier story full of misunderstandings, shady deals, last-second agreements, and lawsuits. And that's the big twist. For as much as this is the rise of Tetris, it's also the story of Bulletproof Software, a small independent game developer founded by a charismatic Dungeons & Dragons fan. His name is Hank Rogers, and he's the real star of this documentary. Although originally from the Netherlands, Hank moved to Hawaii to study computer science before eventually taking residence in Japan, where he became a game developer. Now, if it feels like Hank is butting his way into this review out of nowhere, well, that's not far off from what actually happened in real life. Through a combination of being at the right place at the right time and sheer perseverance, Hank will forever be intertwined in the history of Tetris. Through a number of extremely interesting documentary interviews and videos, we experience every step of the process from both Alexei and Hank's point of view. We see how Alexei stumbles onto the idea and then refines it into the Tetris that we know and love today. We sympathize with him as he navigates a video games industry that is literally foreign to him, and how a simple miscommunicated email will forever change the trajectory of his career. We're there as Hank uses the board game Go to build a working relationship with Nintendo, which leads to a truly captivating story where he'll stop at nothing to track down Alexei and secure the licensing rights to Tetris. Every single twist and turn of the saga is discussed at length with some of the people that were there. Now, what's really exciting is that we get to see the footage from Hank's camcorder, which he seemingly took everywhere. Some of it is as mundane as chatting with a Russian interpreter while in a taxi, or watching Hank use a portable TV in his hotel room. But even this leads to great stories about how he introduced Alexei to the Famicom version of Tetris. This incredible footage also allows us to tag along with Hank as he goes to Russia, goes to the Consumer Electronics Show, and even goes to the Nintendo of America headquarters. If you're a big fan of Nintendo history, then you're gonna love the tour that he takes, which includes going through the offices and seeing the people that are manning the helpline. You won't believe some of the footage that we get to see in this documentary. It's just so incredibly easy to get sucked into the story because Hank Rogers is one hell of a storyteller. He could be talking about something as boring as contract negotiations, and you'll be on the edge of your seat waiting to see what happens next. It won't take you very long to understand how he could talk his way into not only working with Nintendo and securing the rights to Tetris, but also how he could convince Hollywood to make a movie about the whole damn thing. He's a great talker and salesman, and you're going to be under his spell the whole time. Sure, he's probably embellishing some of the history for dramatic effect, but you won't care. He's that good. In fact, Hank is so good that he almost overshadows the actual games that come in this package. I mean, you could play the 18 games at any time, but if you're anything like me, then you put off playing them to find out what happens next in the story. The good news is that once you do finally dive into the game catalog, there's a lot of great stuff to discover. One thing that I learned right away is that it's actually kind of hard to go back to the earliest versions of Tetris. The original Electronica 60 version looks cool, and it finds a neat way to turn simple text into those iconic Tetris pieces, but some of the best parts of the game don't show up until several years later. I'm specifically talking about the scoring system, which wasn't based on clearing lines originally, but rather just dropping blocks. This, along with some control issues, makes it a little bit hard to go back to the first iterations. They're fun to visit and see how the series evolved over those first few years, but I have a hunch that the Tetris games that came out after 1988 will be the ones that get most of the play in most households. Earning high scores from clearing a bunch of lines at once is just a lot more addictive, and it's one of the reasons the game was so popular in the first place. Like I said, a lot of the fun of the package is just seeing how Tetris evolves from the early days into the addictive masterpiece that we love today. We see them try to expand on the gameplay through sequels and Super Tetris, which is an offshoot that also had a bunch of sequels. We're also introduced to Bombliss, a knockoff so similar that they just decided to package it in with Tetris before allowing it to go out on its own in the late 90s. As we learn from the documentary portion of the package, many of these iterations were designed by developers who would go on to make games as diverse as Pokemon and Earthbound. A lot of what we get in this package tends to be the Bulletproof Software games that they were able to publish in Japan independent from Nintendo, who you might know published a lot of the Tetris games in North America and Europe. This means that we get to play Hank's version of Go that he programmed on the Famicom to win over Nintendo's head honcho, a notorious Go lover. We also get to play 3 different versions of Hatris, Alexi's follow-up, and one of several iterations of the Swap and Drop template. One of my favorite games in the package is Tetris Battle Gaiden, a competitive Tetris game for the Super Famicom that mixes classic puzzle elements with magic and counter moves. It has a great sense of style and a bunch of cool backgrounds and the type of special moves that you rarely see in this type of puzzle game. Even if you're just playing against the computer, Tetris Battle Gaiden is an absolute blast. Unfortunately, the game selection is also this compilation's most glaring problem. You see, this is a collection where the most famous versions of the game are nowhere to be found. A great example of this are the iterations that were published by Nintendo on both the Game Boy and the Nintendo Entertainment System. The documentary footage spends a bulk of its time detailing everything that went into securing the rights to these games, yet you can't play them. Sadly, the same is true for Sega's arcade version and the infamous Tengen cartridge, which was briefly released in 1989. Both of these versions come up repeatedly in the documentary footage, but they're nowhere to be found in the selection of games. That's disappointing. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. While I suppose it's nice that we get several versions of the spin-off Hatris, other so-called Tetris sequels are only represented in the footage. Where's Weltris? Where's Wordtris? Where's Faces? Tris 3? Hell, where's Muddle, the weird casino game Alexi programmed after Tetris? Many of these games get lengthy videos that go into their history and importance, so I'm a little surprised they weren't part of the full package. Granted, Alexi says he isn't a huge fan of some of those weird offshoots, but if you're going to spend this much time just showing these games, then you might as well include them. The frustrating part of all this is that a lot of the games that are included barely even get mentioned in the documentary footage. Oh sure, they'll show us the history of how Bombliss came to be, but then they'll yada 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 their way through a bunch of the various sequels and incarnations. I mean, I suppose you could read about how Super Bombliss is different from Super Bombliss DX, but man, all this feels like a massive afterthought in the Tetris story. A whole lot more could have been said about how the Tetris and Bombliss series evolved throughout the 1990s. Look, if you're looking for a comprehensive list of all, or at least most, of the Tetris incarnations released in the last 40 years, boy, you are gonna be disappointed by Tetris Forever. From Tetris Sphere to the next Tetris to 3D Tetris, there's a lot of versions of Tetris out there that are just not included. Some of them are mentioned in the documentary, while others are glossed over completely. Obviously, some versions of Tetris are unavailable due to licensing issues, such as Disney's Magical Tetris Challenge, while others are just too new to be included in this type of package, like Tetris Effect. That said, we do get a pretty great making of video that goes into Tetris Effect and what the future holds for Tetris in general. While it is certainly disappointing that we didn't get more types of Tetris games, the 18 that are in the package cover a lot of ground and show how the series evolved over the years. Yes, I suppose it is a little bit frustrating that my preferred version of Tetris isn't playable in this compilation. But also, that's not a big deal, because I found the classic mode and the Super Tetris sequels to be just as good, if not better. And if you're really itching to play the classic Game Boy pack-in from 1989, many people's introduction to the puzzler, then hey, you're in luck, because they actually did a recreation of that monochromatic Tetris for the brand new Tetris Time Warp game. Man, the fact that we're this far into the review and only now touching on Tetris Time Warp, a new single and multiplayer game that jumps between the different Tetris eras, is a testament to just how much content there is in this package. While some may be disappointed that there aren't more Tetris games, it's the story and the archival footage and material that really bring this compilation together. This is the kind of history lesson that the Gold Master series was made for. I just had so much fun looking at the different pictures and scans and advertisements and videos from that pivotal time in our history. It gave me a greater appreciation for Tetris and the enduring friendship between Hank and Alexei. In the end, Tetris Forever really is the feel-good game of the year. Tetris Forever is more than just a collection of 18 games. It's a harrowing history lesson in the complicated story of bringing Tetris to the world. It's also a celebration of the puzzle game, taking us on a guided tour of the evolution of the franchise and its continued relevance in this industry. Through compelling interviews and amazing archival footage, we feel like we're actually there every step of the way. And all that's before we play a single game. You don't have to love Tetris to enjoy the newest entry in Digital Eclipse's Gold Master series. But I have a hunch that Tetris Forever will make you fall in love with the story of Tetris. Hey, thanks for watching my review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What was the first Tetris game that you ever played? Like a lot of people, my first introduction to the game was through the Game Boy. And let me tell you, it overshadowed everything else on that system. Going in, I figured that I'd be playing Mario Land the most, but a million hours later and it was definitely Tetris. Let me hear your stories in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back tomorrow with another magazine matchup, this time starring a bunch of ninjas that also happen to be turtles. Also, look for my review of the second Atari 50 expansion pack on Wednesday. While I wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,